Welcome back to Removiecapt. Today I will show you a sci-fi drama film from 2007 titled The Man from Earth. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a college professor named John Oldman. John is packing his stuff as he resigned from his job and moving to another place. His colleagues Dan, Sandy, Edith and Harry arrives at his home as there is a goodbye party. Dan offers to help John and lifts up a box with him to put in the car. Harry asks Dan that what the hell that was about. John replies that he just don't like goodbyes. Edith hugs John and asks him that why is he moving so quickly as he just resigned a few days ago. Dan says that you got the history chair at Stanford, but John sarcastically replies I wish. Harry mentions that he has brought taquitos, chicken wings, roastie-toasties and beer, and jokes about that if we had more time we have done a candlelight dinner in McDonald and some strippers, but John replies that taquitos are fine. Dan mentions that Art is going to be late as he is with a student. Edith notices a painting as asks John that if it's an original Van Gogh. John replies that it's just a copy and a friend gave it to him. Dan notices a writing on the back of the painting which says to my friend Jacques Bourne. John then asks Harry to put the food in the kitchen and Harry jokes about it by saying that no, he is going to put it in the bathroom. Everyone then goes into the house. John asks everyone to get comfortable as the furniture is going in the evening. In the house Dan asks John that is there any problem and we want to help. As he is moving in such a hurry, John appreciates the offer, but says that there is no problem. Dan says that he is curious and asks John that where is he going after a decade of professorship. John replies that just call it a cabin fever. After a while Harry gets itchy feet and mentions that he has done this before. Dan denies it and says that you are too young to have done this before. Edith says that John's hasn't aged a day in 10 years and any women in the faculty would have given anything just to have that secret. Sandy then grabs a bow. Dan asks John that what does he hunt. John replies deer mostly and says it the best wild game, lives naturally, eats naturally. In the meanwhile Art arrives at John's house with a student named Linda and meets John and introduces him to his student Linda. Art then gives one of his own written book to John to read on the road. Art then introduces Linda to everyone in the house and asks John that where is he going. Dan mentions that we already covered that and John's got itchy feet. Art jokes and says there are over-the-counter remedies for that. Dan again says that so there is a problem. John replies with a no. And says that he just like to move on now and then, it's a personal thing. John then brings a rare bottle of Johnny Walker Green. Harry opens up the bottle and pours it into everyone's cups. Dan wishes John a long life and a good fortune and all drink it. Art says that as we are done with all this stuff now, what we going to do for the rest of the afternoon. Dan then picks up a burin made up off a parrot beak and mention that it's probably an early Magdalenian era. Art asks to see it and agrees with Dan about the burin. Linda asks that what is a burin. Art explains that a burin is a flint tool for grooving wood and bones to make spear and harpoon points. Harry asks what's a Magdalenian. Dan explain, a later Cro-Magnon, the final culture of Upper Paleolithic. John mentions that he is glad that everybody came over to his house to say goodbyes. Dan replies that he is also glad and wouldn't let him just run off without saying goodbye. Harry and Dan asks John that what is wrong and to come out with the truth as he is with friends. John replies that maybe he have something to tell everyone, but he has never done this before and don't know that how it will pan out. John then asks everybody a question that what if a man formed the Upper Paleolithic and survives until the present day. Dan replies that it's an interesting idea and asks John are you working on a science fiction story? John replies that imagine I am. What would he be like? Dan replies that he have lived through 140 centuries and would have changed with every one of them and the man would have learned as the race learned and his knowledge might be astonishing. Linda asks that what would keep this man alive. Harry replies that in science fiction terms perfect regeneration of the body cells would keep him alive for that long and mention a fact that a human body, if designed to live for 190 years, but most of us die of slow poisoning. John suggests that maybe this man did something right, something everybody else in the history has done wrong. Dan mentions that we have extended a lifetimes in a world that is not fit to live in. Harry says that if a quirk in the man's immune system led to a perfect detox then this man can delay the decay. Edith replies that's a secret we would all love to have. John then asks Edith that do you really want to do that? Live 14,000 years. Art says that why not, if he stays healthy and didn't age them why not. Sandy then asks everyone that is anyone hungry and goes to the kitchen. Harry says that the more he thinks about it, he thinks it's possible, because in one century it's magic and the next it's science. And people thought that Columbus was a nut job. John then mentions that he had a chance to sail with Columbus, and at that time he thought the earth was flat and will fall off the cliff. After hearing that, everybody just looks at John very confused. Dan says that he suppose it's a joke, but he don't get it. John replies that it's nothing to get. Art says that we were just talking about a caveman living to this present time. John replies to Art that as he said, what a chance to learn, once he learned to learn. Dan jokes and asks John that did he start the whiskey before their arrival. Sandy then comes to sit with everyone and ask what's going on. Art mentions that John just confided that he is 14,000 years old. Sandy jokes and says that he doesn't look a day older than 900. Harry then asks John to play his little game and what the punchline. John replies that every 10 years, when people starts to notice that he don't age, he moves on. Everyone still not believes that John is 14,000 years old and asks him to tell them more about it. John starts with his background and says that his first lifetime he aged up to 35, what everyone is seeing now, and he lead his group, but the group left him as they thought that John is stealing their lives away to stay young. Dan then asks that how does he know the first 1,000 years. John replies that I have just the selective memories of that time, the high points, the low points and traumas. John continues by says that he kept getting chased because he didn't die, and then he got the idea of periodically moving on. John says that the first 2,000 years were cold, and he learned that it was warmer on lower elevations. Art asks that what the terrain was like back then. John replies it was mountains and vast plains to the west. Dan says that so far what John has said fits. Harry confirms with John that he's not talking about reincarnation with a 200 separate lifetime. John replies no, one lifetime. Harry wows and says it's quite a lifetime. Linda asks a question to John that what about the oceans? John replies that he didn't see them till much later. Linda again asks that he was curious about where we all came from. John says at first he thought that there were some big guys up there who created all of this. John continues by saying that at first he thought there was something wrong with him, maybe he was cursed, but later he thought that he had a mission. Suddenly the phone rings and John goes into the room to pick it up. It's Ellie, a student from college, calling to ask about her grades. John asks Sandy to get Ellie's paper and tells her about her grades. Sandy and John then comes back to the living room and John continue telling his story. Edith asks about the Van Gogh paint she saw earlier. John replies that Van Gogh gave it to him when back then he was known as Jacques Born. Linda then says that she don't understand that why don't John remember that where he was from. John replies that there is no home now because everything is built up now. In my memory I see what I saw 14,000 back, but now my eyes sees freeways and buildings. Art says that you are still moving on. John mentioned that as everybody noticed him not age, and as soon as that happens he moves on. Dan then recommends John to plan out his next 10 years, create a new identity and just drop into it. John replies that he have done that a few times, but he was caught a few times and spent a year in jail. John also mentioned that he came to America after Van Gogh death in 1890. Art still don't gets it and asks John that, why is he doing this? John replies that he wanted to say goodbye as himself, not as a fake identity. Art leaves the living by saying to John that he have a serious problem. John then goes outside with Sandy to put some boxes in the car. In the bedroom Art calls Dr. Will and tells him that John is acting weird and fabricating some stories and asks him to come as soon as he can. In the meanwhile outside the house Sandy confesses to John that she loves him. John replies that he likes Sandy too, but this could not work as Sandy and any children will age, but he will not. John and Sandy sits outside for a while and have a talk. The scene then cuts to John and Sandy coming back into the house where Harry jumps and tries to grab John, but fails as John puts him down. Linda and Art mentions that they both still have questions about him. And Linda asks that did he do any cave art? John replies that that cave art at Les Aziz was done by a man named Giraud. He would draw any animal we would hope to hunt. Anne asks John to tell about the historic times. John continues by saying it got warmer the next 1,000 years and he hunted reindeer and mammoths, but Art interrupts John by saying that the things John is saying is out of any textbook. John replies to Art that yes, it's canon and mentions that the book Art wrote got most of these things right. John continues by saying that he moved to east towards the rising sun where he thought it would be warmer. John also mentions that it's the first time he saw an ocean. It was beginning of the Bronze Age, and he learned new languages wherever he went, and he was Sumerian for about 2,000 years. After that he continued east to India where he met Buddha and studied with him. In the meanwhile Dr. Will arrives at the house and meets John, and John offers him whiskey. Anne then clears it to everybody that there is no way John can prove his story, just like there is no way for them to disapprove it, and says that we should just go with it. Dr. Will then asks John that did he ever get ill in this enormous lifetime. John replies yes, he got pneumonia, typhoid, yellow fever, smallpox and he survived the black plague. John also mentions that he don't scar. Harry then asks John to stop by his lab before leaving. He could run some tests, but John denies that he is afraid that someone might lock him up 1,000 years to study him. Dan asks John about the things he have studied. John replies that he have 10 degrees including everyone in the house except Dr. Will, and mentions that living 14,000 years did make him a genius, he just had time. Dr. Will then put his hand in his coat and pretends to have a gun and points it at John, asking him that if he shot him would he die. John replies that he never said he was immortal, he said he just old and he might die. Dr. Will asks John that if ever wished it would end. John replies no. In the meanwhile, two men from charity comes to the door to pick up the furniture. Dr. Will then ask John about what he thinks about death. John replies that he fears death just like other. The conversation continues between John and Dr. Will, and Will asks John that if he is comfortable knowing that he has lived while everyone he knew has died. John replies that he regret losing people and he has felt guilty, but he can't do anything about it. John and Dr. Will then goes into the house and Dr. Will continues with the questions. He mentions that Art have told him that John Oldfellows thought that he was stealing their lives. He says that John might have unknowingly done that. Dr. Will then get angry at John as he will not die, and we all will die. He accuses John to be a vampire and pulls out a real gun this time and points at John, asking what will happen if he shot him in the head. But he puts the gun away and leaves the house by saying that he don't have time for this story. After Dr. Will leaves, Harry mentioned that his wife, Mary, passed away yesterday. John runs outside the house and says sorry to Will and takes his gun and sees that is empty. John comes back into the house and everyone says that they would like to hear more about the story. Dan asks John that could there be others like him who have lived without aging. John mentions that there was a man in 1600 he thought he was like him. They talked and promised to keep in touch and parted ways. John mentioned that after 200 years he saw him at a train station but lost him in the crowd and since then he don't know where he is. Dan asks John that is religious. John replies no, but he was religious long time ago but got over it. Dan then asks John that did he ever met someone from our religious history. John replies yes, but says that we should skip this topic, but everyone forces John to tell them about it. Art asks John that was he someone in the religious history. John replies yes, but says that the things most of us believe were just myths. The truth was so simple, and the New Testament canon 100 words or less. Suddenly Edith says that she don't want to hear it and she wants to go home, but everyone convinces her to sit down. John then starts to tell about his version and says that a guy met Buddha, liked his teachings. After 500 years he returned to Mediterranean and seeped into the Roman Empire, then went to the Near East and tried to pass on the Buddha's reaching into a modern form. Technically John claims that he was Jesus. John continues by saying that heaven and hell was just created so priests can rule through seduction and terror, save our souls, but we never lost it in the first place, but Edith calls it blasphemy. John then sees Dr. Will coming back to house and goes outside to get him and brings him into the house. The scene then shows that it's getting night, so John starts to put his stuff in the car and Sandy helps him out. In the meanwhile, Dr. Will explains to everybody that a mentally ill man can imagine things and an entire life and sincerely believe it, and if that's the case with John, then there is a grave disorder. The scene then cuts to John and Sandy standing outside. In the meanwhile, everyone has discussed the things they heard from John, and Dan says that we can listen, but we don't have to believe him and made up our mind about anything. John and Sandy then comes back into house and sits in front of the fire. Dan says that John got 4 men of science completely baffled and they don't know what to make of him. John mentions that Voltaire was the first one to suggest that the universe be created by a gigantic explosion. And Goethe was the first to suggest that spiral nebulae were swirling masses of stars and we now call them galaxies. Sandy then asks John that did he have faith in the human race. John replies that he have seen species come and go, but we still have hope. Edith then says to John that he wasn't Jesus. Arts asks John about the name Jesus and where did it came from. John mentions that he always called himself John. As tales of the resurrection spread, the name was confused with the Hebrew Yochanan, meaning God is gracious. His stay on earth was seen as divine proof of immortality. That led to God as salvation, which in medieval Latin is Jesus. Dan asks John that he never claimed to be the Son of God. John replies that he only told them that he have a master greater than himself. Harry then says that he should be home kissing his wife, but everyone is trapped by his story. Edith still denies and says to John that he wasn't Jesus and starts to cry. Dr. Will then turn on the light and says that is gone too far and everyone is very upset and says that he don't believe that John is mad. What he is saying is not true and forces John to admit it that it's all a lie. John pauses for a second and admits it's all just a story and says that he got this idea from everyone. Edith saw his fake Van Gogh. Dan saw the Buren, and Art gave me a book called Early Man and he just played along. After hearing this, Dan gets angry and curses at John. John says that he tried to cop out many times but he couldn't resist. Arts get angry and leaves with Linda. John then grabs the rest of the bags and goes outside. Sandy follows him and says he don't believes him and says that John just told everyone what they were hoping for. Sandy then asks John for his real name and John replies that it always sounded John. Barry and Edith then comes out of the house and Edith asks John if he is sorry for what he said. John replies that he is sorry and hugs Edith and they both leave. Dan also says his goodbyes and leaves. Sandy then asks John what other fake names he have used. John replies a lot and says 60 years ago he was at Harvard and known as John Thomas Barty. Dr. Will hears John saying that names gets into shock. John then tells Will his dog's and mother's name. Will starts to cry after hearing this and recognizes that John is his father. Will could not take this news, have a heart attack and dies. After the ambulance took Will's body away, John gets into his car and drives but stops. Sandy then goes to car and the story ends. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.